So quite some time ago, my husband had given me some advice. He felt that I should start sharing and posting videos to Facebook and YouTube. The reason for that was that whenever I go after something, I do a lot of research. I'm very passionate about it, and I try to do it the best of my ability. And because of that, he thought that I had information that would be helpful to others that I could share. The problem is ever since I've been a toddler, I've never been a fan of the camera, hate having my picture taken, and the thought of being in a video is 10 times worse. I've attempted to do this several times, and every single time I got so sick to my stomach that I almost threw up, and I just bailed every single time. Even yesterday I was supposed to upload a video, same thing, got really sick, almost threw up, gave up. So you might wonder what made the difference this time. Because even right now, super excruciating for me to do this. Well, there is a saying that I've heard my whole life, and of course I knew what it meant, and it's called "let your haters be your motivators." But I never had any reason to apply that to my life. Obviously, sometimes you might have not the best interactions with people, but never had this situation where I had someone do something that would affect my career or my choices that would motivate me to try harder than I already am. So I had a recent experience that did that. And before I go into how that experience affected me to make this video, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information because a lot of farriers, if you're a customer or a client, you wonder, there's so many out there, how do you know that the farrier that you choose is doing a good job, that they're doing quality work, that they're doing it correct according to industry standard, that they're really helping your horse? You may go through multiple farriers. How do you determine between those? Well, I was in that position myself at one point. It was probably about 12 years ago. I had moved not that long ago from one county to another. I had been married about a year, and the farrier that I had in the county that I lived in before was really good. And then in the new county, I just could not find one. I went through one after another, and maybe they weren't doing horrible work, but I knew that they weren't doing it as good as they should have been. They also sometimes just didn't even complete the job. Like when you rasp a hoof and you have like those pieces of hoof coming off that almost looks like cheese being grated, that needs to be filed off smooth, and sometimes they didn't even do that. They left those pieces on there. It just wasn't even a complete job. And I became very frustrated, and another thing that I would deal with is people just showing up late all the time, or they wouldn't show up at all, or you try to call them and you just can't get a hold of them, and you're trying to keep your horse on a schedule. That was always really important to me as well, that my horse be done on a consistent basis. And I just couldn't get the type of work that I wanted my horses to have. And around that time, my husband had injured his back on the job, and he was supposed to get workman's comp. The company didn't want to pay for it, so they used some underhanded methods to find a way to not have to pay him. That left him without a job, no income, and he couldn't do other work because he was bedridden. He couldn't even walk. They were even thinking about doing surgery on him because he had multiple herniated and bulging discs. And thankfully that ended up getting better over time, but at that time we needed extra income. I was trying to find a job to do, and I didn't know where to turn, what to do. And somehow, I don't even remember how, I ended up getting a flyer for a farrier school. And it kind of just happened at the right time. I wanted to provide better care for my horses, and I needed an income. So I called the school up, and the course was just way too expensive for a family that didn't have money. It was $5,000, didn't have it. So when I talked to an instructor, they said they were doing a special for that season, and they were doing it for half off. I still didn't have $2,500. And the instructor was very compassionate, very understanding of my situation, and did me a huge favor, and did this insanely cheap discount to where I was able to afford to pay for it and go to school. when I was there, I busted my butt. I spent hours studying for my classes. It was a 3-hour drive. I had to go all the way to almost to Ann Arbor. And so I would have flashcards and study the entire way there. When we did live courses, when we actually worked on the animals, I paid attention to everything, asked a ton of questions, and I'll go a little bit more into that in another video, some of my experiences there. But, I just made sure to do my very, very best. And so I did complete the course. And so yes, I am a certified farrier. I learned how to trim and shoe. So that was almost 12 years ago in 2008 that I completed that. And so I do have a background in shoeing and trimming. And from there I got out and it's been pretty good. I had, obviously first time you're out, you have a little bit of struggles getting your clients, but I earned my reputation quickly. I always was on time, never late. If I got held up at another client's place, maybe they had a new horse or a rescue or something that wasn't standing, took me a little bit over time, I always called my clients, never was more than 5-10 minutes late. If it was gonna be anything over that, I made sure that I did not keep them waiting, and I always made sure to do work according to what I was taught and do the best that I could give them. So that earned my reputation and never had an issue. I had very loyal customers. I never really had any flack from any other farriers. And so that's how it's been for the last almost 12 years. And then recently I had a situation come up, and in that I also had some other people involved. So I had a friend, and one of the horses, and not the first horse she bought, but one of the horses she bought, she had asked me, what I thought of the work that had been done on the horse, how it had been trimmed. I had a different farrier previously. And what I gave her was my honest opinion. I wasn't trying to make myself look better by putting someone else down. I just told her honestly that the horse was due for a trim, and for me to judge the quality of work of the previous farrier would not be fair, because in that time frame, the horse's hoof is going to change and revert back to its original condition. Every horse moves differently, just like every person moves differently. Some people can wear shoes with no insoles and that's fine, and other people, the way that their body is built and made, they need to have insoles and help, and just to be able to not wear their shoes out in a way that's bad, that causes their body more problems. And so that was, what I left her with that horse, that same thing, that too much time had gone by. I couldn't really determine what type of work the farrier was doing, not unless they had did something excessive or extreme. And so, I just did the work, just the same standard that I always do, not really paying attention to what the person had done before. That person, my friend, also had another horse that she had bought in before this one, and she had called me out and had me trimming the horse. And so, I usually try to do some background information, ask what was, going on, if the horse has any issues, or is it just a standard trim, from what I could see. I always want to know if the horse is tripping or clipping their front hooves or anything that might cause an issue that we need to correct. And she said that the horse had been trimmed just 2 weeks before, and I couldn't understand why she needed a trim so quickly, since I hadn't, looked at the horse's hooves yet. And she said, well, my horse is tripping really bad, and, I want you to take a look at it and, figure out what's going on. And so I did trim the horse. After that, the horse wasn't tripping anymore. They had no issues with it. The horse, I think the next time it tripped was 2 days before the next scheduled trim. I keep them on a 6-week schedule. And the trims consequently after that, no more tripping at all. They have no issues. And obviously that's a safety issue when you're riding. You don't want a horse to trip and fall. That could cause injury to them and to you. But another thing that they had stated was that the previous farrier had said that the horse has hooves that grow very slow, and that they should be concerned about it. and put them on a supplement or do something. And so she was, of course, very concerned, and she asked me about that. And so that was a red flag to me. I asked her how long that farrier had been working on that horse, and she said this was the first time they'd ever worked on him. And so instead of putting the farrier down, trash talking him, trying to make myself look better, I just asked a question. And I said, if this farrier has never seen this horse before and it's the first time they worked on the horse, how would they know how fast or slow the hooves grow? Because in the 2 weeks time, I actually did have hoof wall that I could trim off. If that horse was growing so slow, there's no way I would have had anything to trim off at 2 weeks. It wasn't excessive, it wasn't long, but there definitely wasn't any issue. So then, of course, that made her and me both concerned why someone would say something with no 100% proof or basis, have the client in a panic, worried and terrified that there's some health issue with their horse that they don't know what it is, thinking that they have to call the vet out and figure out why it's not taking in nutrition or what's causing this problem. I've been working on this horse for several months now. The horse grows hooves grow just as fast as any other horse. There is no issue there. So we forward that, further, and I had another client who was leasing a horse, and I was also training the horse at the time. They had asked me to just do some refresher work, kind of get the horse behaving well again, moving good. And so we did that, and the horse was doing pretty well, but I did notice some issues with their hooves that needed to be fixed. And I just let them know that yes, I am a farrier, so what I'm saying is credible, but I also let them know that I'm not trying to take work from whoever the current farrier was, that that's fine if they fix it, but there were some issues that need to be fixed because it affected my training program, and I wanted to keep the hooves in good condition. I was riding the horse hard. I was riding him 1 hour to 2 hours each time we were in training because I had to condition him as well as work on some of his issues. And that, would be a lot more stress that he would be taking on with his hooves and his legs. So I wanted to make sure that they stayed in good condition. And she had said that, asked if I would go ahead and do the job. And I said, yes, that's fine. But again, I'm not here to take somebody else's work or their job. I just, want to make sure that the horse is taken care of. And had come to find out another thing that we had talked about was the person that was working on the horse before had trimmed the horse, and then 2 weeks later insisted that the horse needed to be shoed. Well, the issues are, one, as far as taking advantage of your clients. You don't trim and then do a shoe job 2 weeks later and charge the person a second time. You would do the trim for the shoes and make sure that you're not overcharging your clients. You never ever want to take advantage of them. And a trim for barefoot is completely different for horse shoes. With horseshoes, you need a completely flat foot underneath. There, you don't want to have any rounded edges because you need the hoof wall to meet the shoe so that you don't have any dirt or gravel or anything working its way up in there that can cause problems. Whereas a barefoot, you're gonna have it rounded really well so that they can break over when they're moving. You give them really good free movement, and so that you don't encourage chipping and breakage. So there was a lot of reasons why that had me concerned. And not only that, the horse had some cracks and chips, and the shoes, the placement of the nails where they would be right in line with that, which would also further break down the hoof wall that we were trying to keep strong, which was the whole reason I wanted the trim in the first place. So the client decided to have me go ahead and trim them instead because the horse didn't even need shoes. It was the middle of winter. They weren't competing the horse. And before I had took it into training, wasn't being rode that much, and even after I rode, the horse wouldn't be rode as on a consistent of a basis as when I was working with it, and when I was already halfway through the training program. This was just to get the horse in shape and to get his behavior better. They didn't have that same time allotment that I did, so his workload would be drastically reduced afterwards. So this was only for a couple more weeks. There was no need for shoes, even for those that are in the business of horseshoeing, because you have barefoot trimmers and you have horse shoers. So even in the industry of shoeing horses, you typically don't put shoes on a horse in the middle of winter when they don't have work to do. And so that was one of the concerns. Well, I've been, after that, trimming him regularly as they were still leasing the horse, and he was doing really well. We never had any issues. And then out of nowhere, he developed some kind of injury or some kind of gait issue. I had not seen it personally, but I guess he had had some issues. And so they had ended up deciding that they weren't going to lease the horse anymore, so it went back to its original owner. And the original owner was using the person that my client had previously used and had switched. And this is the part that really is what motivated me to make these videos and to help others, because this is what I had seen in the industry right from the very start of why I went to school, about having people that really care about their craft and their trade and doing the best that they can. And I'm not saying they have to be the best out there, but doing the best that they possibly can. And so it came full circle of why I even went to school. The original owner of the horse had the farrier that they've always had come out and take a look to see why the horse was having some issues with pain. I thought maybe some saddle sores or some issue, maybe it got kicked in the pasture. So this other farrier, that was the original farrier, had told the owner that it was because of the way that he was trimmed. Now, he was due for his 6-week trim. That would have been on a Monday, and they had come out to see him on a Saturday. So in 2 days, it was his 6-week trim. And they said that he has gait issues and problems because of the way that he's trimmed, that he's unleveled, that his heel bulbs or the heels of his hoof are at different heights, and that it's causing pain in his shoulders, and it created a lump, and that's why he has pain. There was other things said too, which I'll go into that in a second, but just to give an example, you can have a hoof completely balanced, completely flat the way that you trim it. 6 weeks later, that may not be the case. And I'll just give an example with my husband's shoes. As you can see, you have all this wear that is not here, it's not here, and you see more wear here. Then you take another shoe and similar wear patterns, but he obviously doesn't walk completely the same. This one's actually breaking through. You can see a hole there from how he wears his shoes. So would it be fair to say that because these shoes are in this condition after he's worn them, that means that the manufacturer of that shoe, the one who produced the shoe, didn't make a good shoe and it wasn't balanced, that it wasn't perfectly flat on the soles, that it wasn't done right because of how it looks now? That wouldn't be a correct statement, because that shoe was in perfect condition when it was bought. But because of how he walks personally, the way his body is made, it creates wear patterns, and the longer he wears it, the more those wear patterns become manifest. So you can have any horse, you can give it a perfectly balanced trim, 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, it's not going to look anything the same. And I always trim a balanced hoof. So if you have a hoof like this, you can see that with this shoe that it's perfectly level, and that's how it would be at the heels. So what I do to make sure and check of that is when I rasp a hoof, I always make sure that my rasp is going to sit perfectly level on the heels. And not only do I check it across, I put it on an angle like this and like that, put it at all the different angles, make sure that that hoof is level. What happens 6 weeks from there? That's why you have a schedule. It's why you have your farriers coming out on a consistent basis, is so that you can keep that hoof in as best condition as possible, because at that point the horse starts becoming unbalanced again according to how it moves, and it's now time for you to bring it back to that original trim. So now go back to this other farrier that, you know, looked at it and said that I gave an unbalanced trim. So I was really curious when I had been given this information, because he was telling this not just to the owner of the horse, but there was a group of people there. So now my reputation is at stake. My livelihood is at stake. And not only that, it's really important to me about being an honest person. Honesty has always been important. I always have 3 traits that I dislike in people more than any others. And the first 2 are if people lie and if they're arrogant. That's always a huge issue for me. So of course I'm gonna hold myself to that same standard. I'm not perfect, but definitely hold myself to that standard to always be honest. So of course I was very frustrated, because that kind of put into question my integrity and my honesty, my work ethic in my craft. So it was still light out when I was there, and this was after the trim was supposedly corrected to fix my work. And I went out there, and the thing is that from what I'd heard, that they spent very little time trimming. It was just a really quick trim and was done to correct it. And so I went and looked, and yes, of course, the heels were not level, because it was 6 weeks later. As I said, this is what happens. Every farrier knows this. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business. If horses kept their feet in perfect condition, there'd be no need for them to come out. They would just wear them evenly. So I wanted to see what on earth they were even talking about. I went and looked at the hooves in the back, and lo and behold, the heels are still uneven. They just charged someone $45 to pay for a correction trim that they said they were supposedly correcting, and yet the heels were still unbalanced, which would explain why they were able to trim the horse so quickly, because they didn't make sure that those heels were at the same height. You're supposed to bring the heels back to the widest, highest point at the back of the hoof, and they're supposed to be balanced at the same height all the way across, and they were not. And if you were to go look at that horse right now, they still are not balanced. The heels are still at different heights, different levels, and not brought back to the same point. So of course at this point I'm a little bit livid, and that's actually an understatement. I wasn't a little bit livid, I was very livid, because not only were they bringing into question my honesty, my integrity, my work ethic, how I do my work, if it's correct or not, but it was all based on a lie. Because if they at least had did a good job themselves, even though how they went about it was not right, at least maybe I could justify that they're really good at what they do and they were doing their best. But the thing was, all the things that they said that I did that was wrong, that was just because of growth, not because of how a job was done, wasn't even true, because they never corrected those issues. So yes, there are farriers that are out there that are like that. They want to come out, take your hard-earned money, your $45 for just a 5-10 minute job, and leave and be on their way without much concern for how the work is done. Some people start out like that. Some people don't start out like that. Some, when they started, they did have a good reputation and they did have a good work ethic and a good moral standard, and then somehow along the way they lost it, which can be kind of understandable. It is a very hard job. It's a lot of, the physical labor is very intense. So maybe sometimes people they want to start to take it easy after they've been doing it for years. I know personally it kills your back. Horses get rowdy, they get nasty. The longer you make them stand, the more patience you make them have, the harder it is for that horse to have patience. So, I gave one example of how you can tell, if a farrier isn't being completely honest or not. If they're picking apart someone else's work and it's 6 weeks later, that might be a red flag. It may not be 100% that they're wrong, but that's a huge indicator that there's a red flag there. You shouldn't have to cut down other people's work to gain work. You should be able to prove through your own reputation, through your own work, that you can do a good job. And the other thing is check to see if what they're saying is true. This person gave an example. They showed that the foot wasn't level, but they did not indicate that that is because it was 6 weeks of growth. They did not see that horse when it was trimmed, and everyone that's ever known me, the person that was leasing the horse, knew that I was keeping the horse level. They watch what I do. My other clients, they all know their level. So that's an indicator. The other thing is if you have someone say something like that, check and see if what their work when they're done. Unfortunately, the owner, must not have the knowledge to do that. But had they had the knowledge, they could have went and took anything. They could have took a shim that you use for carpentry work. They could have took a piece of bark. They could have took any kind of tool that's flat, and they could have checked to see if when he was done with his work, if it was as level as he said that it needed to be, like he said he had corrected it. So that's why I'm, doing this. I want people to be armed with the tools to be able to check and see if what people are saying is true. And I apologize for my dogs. Mac. Be able to be armed with the tools that they can see for themselves if what their farrier is saying is true. So that's just one example. I will give more in the future, or if you have questions, go ahead and do that. And another thing is, if a person isn't coming out on a regular schedule, then that is also a huge concern. If they went to school, they paid to school, this is their craft, they should be the ones telling you that it's important. It's not the customers who have the knowledge to know when a horse is going to be due. And it's not fair to say that you're going to be committed to working on a client's horse and say that you're going to be there and then not make that schedule a priority. If you say you're going to be there at 6 weeks, you should be there every 6 weeks, unless for some reason the horse had a little bit slower growth and doesn't need you to come out to do work. If they're not answering your phone calls, if they show up really late and they don't notify you that they're coming late, I'm sorry, there's no excuse for that. I've heard that that's just the farrier business, that's just how people are. Well, that's not true, because I don't do that. I always let people know if there's something that caused me to be running late, and I just try to make it a practice to not be late in the first place. And if I have a really good excuse, I still let the person know, like, hey, this is what happened, I'm going to be coming a little bit later. If they're not showing up at all, that is just the most rude thing that you could do. It's very unprofessional. I don't care if the business and the trade is known for that. It's still rude, and it's showing that your horse is not their priority. Whatever they have going on in their personal life is more important than your time, your horse, and your horse's hoof health. When you go to school for this, you know how the hoof is the foundation of the whole horse. You can have a healthy horse otherwise, but if they can't even walk properly on the 4 feet that they have, then they're still not going to function right, and it can cause severe damage. So those are all things that to look at to know if your farrier is doing correct work or not. Make sure that they're answering their phone calls. Make sure that they're on time. If they can't be on time, make sure that they notify you. Make sure that they stick to a consistent schedule. Trims should be no more than 6 weeks. Some do 4 weeks, but you definitely should not be extending, the 6 weeks. If you're doing shoes, they shouldn't be extended past 8 weeks. That is just too long for a horse to go without correcting. That's when the hoof starts just completely falling apart and going back. Like, all the work that was done is kind of pointless, because now you're starting back at square one. What you want to do is be able to maintain the hoof in the best shape that you possibly can. You want to keep it in that shape. You don't want it falling apart and starting over. That's why, cracks don't heal. That's why the hooves will keep chipping. That's why, they don't get balanced and their gaits don't improve. So those are all really important. The other thing to check for is if they're trashing other people, why is that? And so I kind of wondered that myself, why this had even happened, why they were calling me out that I was doing bad work, that I basically was lying. And I sat down and I started to think about it. And I think why that was within about a month's time, I had been away from doing farrier work for a little while. I still did it for myself, I did it for my family, but I had taken a break because I used to do it full time. And so I had come back to it because I had a lot of people that had issues with their hooves. I was helping a friend buy a horse. And when I was helping that friend to, look at horses, they would, maybe tell her, well, the horse is all good, but it has this one issue with the hoof. And my friend would say, well, that's okay, because my friend's a farrier, she can tell you. And they're like, oh, really? That's awesome, and they said that they had farriers come out and the issues were not getting fixed. They kept coming out and they're like, we just don't know why it's not getting better. And so they would say, well, would you be willing to work on my horses? Well, I hadn't really planned on it, but I was like, yeah, I guess that's fine. They said that their farrier hadn't been showing up, hadn't been returning their calls, and the issues were not getting fixed. And so I took the clients on, and this happened several times. Every time we would go look at a horse, or then they would, tell a friend of theirs, or their friend would tell a friend. And then next thing you know, like within a month's time, I had like 35 horses that everyone was upset with their previous farrier for all these things, for things not being done correctly, for problems not being fixed, that they wanted their horse to move properly, they wanted to not be in pain anymore, or they wanted their cracks to go away or their chips to grow out, and it just was not happening. And so 35 clients later, found out that every single one came from the same farrier. And I don't take much stock in what goes on in the rumor mill, and if clients tell me things about their farrier, well, sometimes the clients don't know the trade. So if they say someone's late all the time, that's fine, yeah, that's very unprofessional. But if they're just bashing people, I don't take too much stock. It could be true, it might not be. But this is one case where client after client after client was saying the exact same things. And I could see personally in the work that these issues were cropping up in every single client, and problems were not getting fixed. So it come to find out, the farrier that I had gotten these 35 extra horses within less than a month's worth of time is the same one that was discrediting my honesty and my ability to do a good job. So I think what it really comes down to is that because they weren't showing up on time for their jobs, not taking pride in their work, it became an attack on my work. But the thing is I'm always on time. I take it seriously. I keep to a schedule, and I'm constantly trying to learn and research and never just stop learning, so that I can always, give the best care that I possibly can. So, if you notice that, those traits, if you see those things, those are all red flags. Start looking up the research and checking, or you can ask me or someone that is reliable that, to check on that. I'm not going to name the person. This isn't about getting revenge. This isn't about gossiping. It's more about standing up for what's right, making sure that people know that I am an honest person, because I know that this is going to get around, because it already has. They had no problem, causing defamation to my name in front of an entire group of people, and even the person who is not my client, that uses them, I really respect that person. I'm fine with them using someone else as a farrier. That's not a problem for me. But it is every person I respect. I've known them through a business aspect for a long time. I find them to be honest, generous, just a really decent human being. So for someone else to have a person like that question my honesty, integrity, I would want someone that I respect to have respect for me too. So that became really important to me to clear my name, that the things that are being said isn't true, but I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't so awkward. Didn't want to go to the person myself, didn't want to do it to the person who said the things that weren't true, that gave incorrect information. So this is just the easiest way for me to clear my name, because if they said it to them and to an entire group of people, obviously they might not hold back from telling others as well. So from here on out, I would like to continue to, this is obviously a lot longer because it gives all the details of why this even came about, but it does show the dishonesty in the business that goes on. So in the future, I would like to put more videos that are much shorter, much more concise. It doesn't have all the baggage of this situation, that will really help people to get the best work that they can, to know if the jobs that they're getting, if they're quality or not, if who's working on their horses are honest or not. And if there's something that you would like to see, if you have a question, go ahead and post in the comments or message me, and we can look at putting that in another video. We'll try to keep them to 5-10 minutes or less even than that. Just short, simple things that you can start using to arm yourself with the knowledge, so when someone comes out, you have a leg to stand on. You absolutely do have a right to question. If someone ever says, I'm the professional, so don't question what I do, there's a problem with that. I always tell all my clients, ask as many questions as you want, because as a professional, I should be able to answer them and explain them in a way that makes sense so that they understand. So if you aren't getting those questions answered, then message me or put a comment, and we'll post it in another video coming up.